We all want to feel peace in our lives. Peace in our choices, our beliefs, our relationships, and our environment. I've learned that this desired contentment is often found through holding on to less. When we pare down what we own, what we consume, and what we value, we're left with what's intentional, a personalized curation of what is important and true and useful to us. I'm Shannon Leyko, and you're listening to Paring Down, a podcast aimed at helping you declutter not only your home, but any area of your life that's overwhelming. Here, we're having interesting and honest conversations about the physical and mental clutter that drowns out what truly matters to each of us. And together, we'll learn how to pare it all down, not for the sake of perfection or becoming rigid, rather so we can move through life with less overwhelm and more joy, wisdom, and peace. Welcome back to Paring Down, everyone. I'm Shannon, your host. If I haven't said that recently, you never know. If someone's new around here and they're like, who's this lady talking to me? My name is Shannon Leyko. I'm so glad you're here, and you have arrived at an excellent episode if this is your first one, because I'm about to share an interview with someone who is, I would consider like a celebrity in the home management world. There are a couple of big names out there. You think Joshua Becker, maybe Gretchen Rubin. She wrote The Happiness Project, then also a second book about decluttering. Kendra Adachi, right? These are some really big names that maybe someday I can get them on my podcast. And today is someone among their ranks, and that is Tyler Moore of Tidy Dad. If you do not follow Tidy Dad on Instagram, you are one of a few who don't, but I'm going to tell you a little bit about him. So Tyler's work in terms of helping families keep a tidier, less overwhelming home, especially with kids, has been featured on Good Morning America, the New York Times, Apartment Therapy, a billion other places, and he's helped millions of people transform not only their homes, but their lives. Tyler's also a New York City public school teacher and father of three. They live in a little 750 square foot apartment in New York City. And as you're going to hear on today's episode, he also has a book coming out called Tidy Up Your Life. It's coming out in January. We're going to talk all about it. He's just overall full of knowledge, wealth, and a positive attitude, helping anyone in any space find a way to manage their home, keep it tidy, and do so in a happy, intentional way. I think you're going to get that vibe throughout this episode. He's just a really positive person. I loved talking to him. I could have talked to him all day. You're welcome that I finally cut off our conversation. Or maybe you're not welcome because you're going to wish that it went on for like 3 hours. Either way, I hope you enjoy it. So let's dive in with my conversation with the one, the only Tidy Dad, aka Tyler Moore. Or maybe I should have said that opposite. It's Tyler Moore, aka Tidy Dad, but I feel like the Tidy Dad, the Tidy Dad name is pretty darn famous out there. So Tyler Moore, Tidy Dad, here he is. Tyler, thank you so darn much for being here. It is an honor, and I'm just really excited for the people to hear all of your wisdom today.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Okay, so I just gave a little intro about your book coming out in January, Tidy Up Your Life. And so everyone kind of has an idea of who you are, probably because most of my listeners follow you, I would assume as well. But for those who might not know as much about you, would you give kind of a high level idea of who you are and what you're all about?
Yeah, so my real name is Tyler. I have this nickname, Tidy Dad, and that's how I feel like many people know me now. But I live in New York City with my wife and 3 daughters. I'm also a New York City public school teacher. I teach 5th grade. I've been a teacher for 17 years. So I feel like that teaching background really drives what I do as Tidy Dad. Obviously, I understand that routines are important, systems are important, but also equipping our kids with the independence of knowing how to do things and how to grab the things that they need, like their shoes and their backpack, and knowing where their toothbrush is. And so as Tidy Dad, I really love sort of sharing the journey of how I personally have tidied up my life while also helping to give people practical tips. In the book, I talk about tidying up your mind and also tidying up your space, which we'll get into. But I do feel like both of those areas are so inextricably linked. And so it's really exciting as Tidy Dad to share a little bit of the mess that I've been through myself while also helping others, I don't know, really embrace this beautiful mess that is life.
Yeah, your vulnerability, I think, is why so many people have been drawn to you because you're willing to share the messy part,
Yeah,
not just the after, right? Like a lot of times we see the after on Instagram, these beautiful spaces or these people that have their lives together, and you're like, but has it always been perfect?
right.
And usually, no, that's not always the case. And so I'm excited for you to share some more of your story as well because I think it is really powerful. And by the way, we didn't touch on this before we started recording, but I used to live in New York City. I
Wow.
lived in Washington Heights for a couple
Wow.
of years in my early 20s. I'm a singer, so I was up there pursuing Broadway, and then I became Miss New York in the Miss America organization. And so,
Wow.
yeah, I miss the city so much. I lived in a little tiny studio, and so it's funny sometimes, as people do, and I'm sure you get this too
Yeah.
online when you have a relatively large number of people who have eyes on your space, they kind of make assumptions, right?
Yeah.
And so people see our home and they think, oh, she just knows suburban life. And I'm like, no, no, ma'am. I have lived in a 200 square foot apartment with my kitchen literally built into the wall and it had French doors in front of it. And you couldn't walk. You open the French doors and there's your stove.
Yeah.
Like that
Yeah.
was the kitchen. And I miss it so much. And so as I was reading your book, and of course, as I follow you on Instagram and I see the way you guys have made your 750 square foot apartment work for your family of five, I love it. And if my husband's job would allow us to live in New York City, I would so be down. I think it's so cool.
Yeah, no, and it's fascinating. There's so many assumptions and also misconceptions that people have about when I show our life in New York City, but I think that that's one of the joys as Tidy Dad is just to offer this alternate sort of perspective. And I don't believe that everybody has to live in a tiny apartment in New York City. It's great that we all get to make choices about our spaces and how we allocate real estate within those spaces. But there is something that gives me a little bit of credibility when I'm talking about organizational systems or like how to zone your kitchen or how to zone your bathroom for maximum efficiency. Like we do share one tiny bathroom between the five of us. So, as I talk about in the book, it's the site of very strategic activity all throughout the day. So, it needs to be efficiently organized. But it is fun because I feel like, in this day and age of sort of like stopping the scroll, it's like when people see that I have three kids and we're walking down the street in New York City, it automatically opens up all of these questions and all of these sort of assumptions and all of these misconceptions. And so it is fun to sort of play into that. And I do think I've had many people similar to you. They're like, someday I would just love to move to New York City or move to Paris or move to London and just have this really, really small footprint, of an apartment and just sort of live that life for a little bit. But as you know, like it does feel simple. Like it's weird to talk about New York City and a simplicity, but yet there is this simplicity sort of that comes from this little apartment and the little tiny kitchen that's behind the French doors, So it's been fun.
Oh my gosh. 100% yes. This is why New York becomes a character of itself, whether it's in
Yeah.
movies or books, right? Because it's a fascinating world, especially for those who haven't ever lived that lifestyle. It was such a big and fun dream when I was 23 and packing my
Yeah.
bags and moving to New York. And then you get there and you're like, I'm still me in New
Hmm.
York,
Hmm.
right? And it becomes normal. But you do learn so much. I'm a big believer that by having boundaries, you are more creative. You do learn kind of greater lessons. The example I always use is, have you ever watched Project Runway?
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Okay. So the designers on Project Runway always make their best clothes when they have some ridiculous boundary in place. You have
Hmm.
to use this weird material. You have to include this kind of a style, whatever, right? And so they are kind of have these boundaries they have to use and figure out how to make something great versus when they're said you can do anything you want, then they tend to bomb, right? Because
Yeah.
there's no
Yeah.
boundaries in place
Yeah.
that's forcing them to get creative. And
Yeah.
so by having a smaller home, like you said, it has forced you to become better at organization. It has forced you to become better at decluttering. You have to get more creative. You have to think harder and work harder at your why and make sure that you understand that everything in your home needs to be functional or enjoyable, right? Like you don't have space for the superfluous stuff.
No.
And I think that really does give you an edge up in this decluttering, tidying world.
Yeah, I think so. And it forces us like on weekends to get out and enjoy the city and to explore and travel and go and do. And, it's interesting because we have conversations with our daughters about, what type of home do you want to live in someday? Do you know where you would like to live? What type of job would you like to have? What do you see yourself doing? And it's interesting to hear them because they ask questions. People think about kids going to the city and they're like, oh my goodness, my kids could never do that. They live in the suburbs and they're like, how do you navigate all this? And sometimes we have the opposite. Like when we leave and we go to the suburbs, the girls are so confused by basements and hallways that have all of these doors and why their grandparents have like 3 bathrooms that they're like, there are only 2 of them. Why do they have 3? And they're like, why do kids not share a bedroom? Like, isn't that like, don't they miss each other? So it's interesting hearing those questions, but also, my oldest daughter was like, some days she was like, I think that I want a smaller space like we have, because I really like to travel. I really like to go places. And I just don't know that I want to take care of all of those things, and it's interesting to hear how, obviously our kids, they're sponges to what we talk about, what we value, what we think about. And it's not to say that she's going to live in some small apartment like us someday. She may have a much larger home somewhere else. But more so, I want my daughters just to be thinking and to be inspired and to be sort of questioning and also dreaming about what could be possible that isn't tied down to material possessions or, you know, trying to get more positional power at work or saying, I want a job where I'm working 75 hours a week because everyone's going to think that I'm this like super successful person. Like we're trying to instill, those like core values of, and it's chapter 2 of the book, which is this idea of what is just enough. But like, that is important for our kids to start to learn and understand. And as you said, to be able to set boundaries on certain things, because boundary setting in one area of life opens up possibilities in so many others. And so I do feel like when we're talking about tidying and when we're talking about decluttering, it isn't just about, and I talk about this in the book, like it's not just about editing to where you're left with the bare minimum. Really, it is editing so that you can then make space for what is important to you, what it is that you value. Like if you're an avid skier, then you need to make space for your skis.
Right.
And so I do feel like that idea of tidying, it's about the physical possessions, but it's also about our mental health. It's about our emotions. It's about our hobbies. It's about our professional lives. And so I am excited in the book to sort of dive into all of those different aspects of tidying.
Yeah. Kids, they see things on such a clear heart and such a clear head. A lot of times I think they get a bad rap for being little tiny hoarders because they like to hold on to their little tiny things.
Yeah.
But the difference is that they really can step back from what the cultural norms are and just see kind of what makes sense to them, right? And so I think it's really interesting that your girls can go into a larger home and be like, I don't think 2 people need 3 bathrooms. Like, that doesn't make sense to me. Or, they don't have this sense of deprivation by having to share a bedroom. And so much of what our kids learn in terms of what they view as normal or a necessity rather than a want,
Yeah.
especially in Western culture, we really forget that most of our quote needs are just wants. But they learn so much of that from the posture we take as their parents. An example that's not to do with cluttering is my 2 oldest are both born on Christmas Eve, not planned. They
Wow.
just came on Christmas Eve.
Wow.
They weren't even due then. The first one was weird. You're like, okay, I'm having a Christmas Eve baby. And then the second one was just like, are you kidding me? Like again?
Yeah.
Like this is
Yes.
crazy.
Yes.
And
Yes.
so I often get the question, oh gosh, that must be hard. Your kids share a birthday. Like they probably don't like having to share that day, huh? And I'm like, what? No, they love it. They think it is the coolest thing ever. Why? Because never once have I said to my kids, I'm so sorry you have to share your birthday with your
Yeah.
sister, with your brother. Like, I know that's hard. We'll make sure we try and have a special day just for you. None of that. I
the only messaging they've ever received from my husband and me is, isn't this the coolest thing ever, that not only you share a birthday with your brother or sister, but it's on Christmas Eve? Like, that
Yeah.
is so awesome. You know what I mean? We get to have two parties on the same day. Like, we pump it up. And so therefore that is their perspective. And so the way that you and Emily, it's Emily, right?
Uh-huh.
Your wife?
Mhm.
Okay, gosh, I want to make
Yes.
sure I got that right. But the way that you and Emily have clearly just portrayed what it means to have just enough is that it's a great thing to just have enough, because then you can, like your daughter say, go travel, go do what you want to do. You have room for the things that matter to you, and they're not getting lost among things that don't matter to you, right? And so they see it as this very positive thing, instead of what the culture will say is, oh, well, if you're in a small space, then you haven't worked hard enough to get a bigger house, or you need
Hmm.
to have this name brand in order to be accepted by your peers. And that is just not in their realm of like consciousness.
Yeah.
And that's a direct reflection of you. And so I think as parents, it is so important that we approach decluttering and tidying and whatever it is with this positivity, so that our kids can learn that it is a good thing. It is not about deprivation.
Yeah, and I think that that's the because I get some questions about with the subtitle, this idea of rethinking how to declutter, because there's so much out there about the process of decluttering, and there are some mechanics, that people have to sort of apply. The idea of like, and I outline in the book, the idea of like clearing a space, and then you need to sort and see what you have. You need to assess, what do you want to keep, what do you want to move out, and then you need to make the plan for, how are you going to organize the spaces. But that philosophy can be applied to so many other aspects of life. And what you mentioned is, for my girls, it's interesting because and I chronicled this in the book, I had a pretty significant mental health sort of like breakdown or crisis when I became a new parent. My oldest daughter at the time was 2. My youngest daughter was 7 months old. We had upsized the number of people who lived in our apartment. I had also upsized the positional responsibilities at work, because again, that's what society sort of tells us. And especially as a teacher, as soon as I hit the like 5-year mark in the classroom, everybody starts to ask, so when you move into administration, when you move, and that's the only way that you can get more money, you're going to have to provide for your family in X, Y, and Z. Like, you need all these responsibilities. You'd be great as a principal. Everyone would love you. And so I followed that path because that's sort of what was expected of me. But then there was this question of what actually happens when you find yourself with this huge mess that you now have to sort of like sort through. And I felt like as a dad, I was having these feelings of like, I want to provide for my family. I want to do well at school, but yet I really want to spend more time with my kids. That's where my heart is. As I talk about in the book, it's like my head and my heart were completely rewired. And so then I had to figure out, what do I do with all of these feelings? And so I see, as a dad, none of us are perfect parents. My middle daughter, she got a piece of candy yesterday at school from her teacher. It was sitting on the counter. I thought it was extra Halloween candy. I opened it up and ate it. He came in and was like, "Daddy, where's my lifesaver?" And I was like, "I'm really sorry, Matilda. I just ate it." And she sobbed and she was like, "You're just a candy monster." So I don't want listeners to think that I fully have it all together, because there are aspects of my life that I have processed this mess. And I feel like for the big things of what I value and what's important, the girls are now seeing the manifestation of a lot of that decluttering work that I went through when they were very young. And I had to go through 3 years of therapy to really unpack, why do I think in the way that I do? Why do I value the things that I do? And I remember asking my therapist, I was like, is there something wrong with me? Like, I'm in New York City. I'm in these groups where there are these dads, but I only see the dads for like an hour on the weekend. Everybody seems to just like disappear. They're all pursuing all of these things at work. They're in finance, they're in business, they're doing all of these different things, but yet here I am saying, I actually desire less. I actually want more time and space at home and with my kids. I was like, is there something wrong with me? And she was like, no, you're just wired differently. Everyone is. And that's okay. And so so much of my journey as tidy dad has also been just this sorting through the mess that is sometimes my mental sort of clutter, and being able to really name what matters to me and to us for our family in this season, and then being ruthless about editing out those other things. And our kids, they're watching this process unfold, and it is okay to feel like a mess sometimes, and it's okay to talk about the mess with our kids and with our spouses. You obviously do it in, an age appropriate way, but like, my daughters have watched me. In October, I did a 30 item for 30 days clothing challenge where I was trying to see, does eliminating the amount of things that I have in my closet actually lead to any sort of change? And it was fascinating for my girls to say, Daddy, why are you doing that? Don't you want to have more colors in your wardrobe? What about this thing? Why do you have those clothes under the bed? Why did you move them out? And then I just edited the things because I've been able to bring things back into my wardrobe now that it's a new month. And it's fascinating for them to see the process that I'm like going through. And I think that that's so important with our families and with our kids and with our friends.
Yeah, they watched you figure out what is just enough, right? And
Yeah.
sometimes it takes a little bit of experimentation in order
Yeah.
to figure that out, you know? Well, you mentioned that your kind of paring down, decluttering, tidying journey started as the catalyst for that was a professional breakdown. I don't know if
Yeah.
that's a
Yeah.
strong word for it, but
Yeah.
you realized, kind of like you just said, you wanted something different professionally. Would you kind of walk us through that story and how it led to bleeding into your belongings in your home as you pared down what you wanted professionally?
Yeah. So, you know, my wife and I feel like we were pretty tidy people. Like, we always had an apartment, especially in New York City. And at the time, it was just two of us in this 750 square foot apartment, which felt like a huge mansion. Um, but we had established like what were our systems, what were our routines, what were our boundaries. But there's nothing like early parenthood, especially when you add on that second kid, to sort of implode whatever sort of perceived systems you have in place because you're tired. There's little energy to do much of anything besides like care for these children and also try to do the best that you can at work to keep, the wheels turning. Um, but we had upsized a lot of aspects of our life. And so I was just continuing to go through the motions. And I thought, okay, at school, if I work harder, if I try more, if I prove myself and be the be all end all for these people, then somehow life is just going to feel a little bit better. But that fall, when we had two little kids, my wife's sister was also diagnosed with cancer. Her and her husband lived in the apartment below us. And I felt like I reached that point where my mental and emotional capacity was stretched literally to this like razor thin sort of margin. And I remember at school, having a pretty intense conversation with my supervisor, and it was just something that snapped in me. And I remember, you know, anxiety is something that I've always sort of dealt with. I think that many people do. It manifests itself in different ways. Mine was sort of like this physical release of crying. I would hold it together in the mornings. I would say goodbye to the girls at a walking commute. And walking to school every day, I was so overcome with the mental and emotional stress that I would cry. The physical release of tears helped, but I also knew when I was about 10 blocks from school that I needed to snap out of it and that I needed to dry up those tears because no one wanted to hear about them at school. But I recount in the book that there was this moment where, as a school administrator, was having to deal with a lot of discipline and behavior, meeting with parents. And there was this moment where I was in a parent meeting with a kindergartner and the mom and the school social worker, and the boy jumped up on the table, took his backhand, and he just slapped me straight across the face with the mother looking on. And there was nothing. It's one of those really intense situations where, as the adult, you've just been slapped by the kid. There is that force. Obviously, he was a kindergartner, but it was more so what that represented was for me this feeling of I have no control right now. There are these boundaries that have been really crossed at work that are now leading into my own family. I see the impact it's having on my wife. I see the impact that it's going to start to have on my daughters. And I was not willing to compromise that anymore. And that's when at school, I had that same social worker who was in that meeting. She then pulled me aside afterwards and she had this conversation with me of like, what are you doing? Everybody said that you were a really great teacher. And she recounted for herself, like when she was a mom, the decision that she had made to step back in her career because she had become a supervisor. She was supervising social workers all across Queens. Everybody said, look at how successful you are. But she said, but you know what? In that success, that perceived success, she was like, I actually was pulled away from the things that I really loved, which was like directly working with kids. And I knew the type of mom that I wanted to be, and I wasn't willing to compromise. And so sometimes you have people step into your life and there is this moment of realization that you have. And for me, that fall was sort of a combination of all of these different things. And then I was able to take leave from my job, which was the first time I had ever stepped back in a way because it had a financial impact on my family. I was like, am I really selfish for doing this? I was in therapy at the time and I asked my therapist, like, do you think that this is a good thing to do? And she was like, I would really encourage you to consider what would happen if you didn't take this leave. And that was a powerful question that then you can also translate to the physical spaces, and the tidying and the mess that we sometimes feel. You can ask yourself, what is the impact if I don't declutter this closet? What is the impact if we continue to accumulate all of these toys? What's the impact if I don't talk to the grandparents about the fact that they don't need to bring armfuls full of brand new toys every time they come over to visit? And so I do feel like I learned through the pain of, that professional turmoil, how to sit with that mess and then also translate the skills that I learned to other messes of life too.
Wow. Well, thank you for sharing that because, I know that that was a very difficult time in life. And while you have now been able to take the lessons you learned and turn it into probably one of the best things you've ever done in your life,
Yeah.
it's still not always easy to share those harder moments. So thank you so much for doing that. And, I appreciate so much. It's interesting. You had said a little bit ago that you thought, oh gosh, what's wrong with me? I want less. Like, is there something wrong with me? And it's so interesting that we can have that sense of insecurity in the face of what's normal in society, what the world around us in this Western culture tells us is success. What, especially maybe as a dad, there's still these stereotypes. You are the provider. You cannot step back because of the financial repercussions. You should be seeking more and more and more, right? And for you to step back, to me, is a superpower.
Yeah.
It is saying, I'm actually stronger than the current. I am stronger than the current of this society telling me what success is. And I'm actually going to just go right on upstream in the direction that means something to me, because my life is my life. It is not what the world of consumption tells me it needs to be. And that, in my eyes, is truly a superpower and a strength, because most people don't have I guess I wouldn't even say the wherewithal. Maybe they don't have the guts to do it. It is scary. It's scary to say to friends and family, no, I'm not going to take that approach to life, right? Because first of all, people will think, they'll immediately get defensive. Well, do you think that I'm doing something wrong because I'm pursuing a bigger house, or because I live somewhere different, or because I have all this stuff, right? Like, and you don't want to cause defensiveness in other people simply by making a choice that is against the grain, that has nothing to do with them. It has everything to do with you. You know what I mean? Like, there are so many aspects of it that to me scream bravery. And so I want to encourage you with that. And I'm so grateful that you've shown up in such a brave way, because obviously it has helped literally hundreds of thousands of people that you've touched over, probably millions, honestly, at this point, with the amount of places that you've been interviewed and then your social media platforms and stuff. It's really, really powerful. And the way that you were able to take the professional I don't even want to call it a downgrade, because that's not what
Right.
it was, but like the scaling down,
Uh-huh.
professionally, and turn that into stuff. I'm going to leave the funny story for the people to read in the books about how that manifested in your apartment, because it is a great story, and I just saw it playing out like the second everything
Oh,
happened. I know I'm going to try and say it like without giving the details away, and then you hear the door unlock. I was like, oh, I
yes.
know how this is going to go.
Oh,
Anyways, it's a great story, but basically you took this time away professionally, and in that period of time is when you started to scale down the things in your home. You were like, I'm overwhelmed at work, I'm overwhelmed at home, how do I approach this? You pared back at work, and then you pared back what you owned inside of your house to
yeah.
make your house more functional for you. And all of that, like I said, is in the book. So you talked about that experience when you were letting different things go in your apartment, and you gave some really great questions that I would love if you could share some of those with the listeners, of the things we can ask ourselves on a deeper level that can help us figure out what we want to let go of.
Yeah. And I feel like the most powerful question to start with is, what is just enough in this current season? And I think that when you think about that question of what is just enough, you have to think about it in a couple different categories. You are thinking about, there's a question of like square footage, but it can also be more simple of like, how many dress shirts is enough? How many pairs of jeans is enough? I think that then beneath that are questions of, what do I value? What's really important? How do I want to spend my time? What do I enjoy doing? And I give the example of clothing because I think clothing is so personal to each of us. When we go to our closets or our wardrobes and open them up without talking to anyone else, we're pretty much able to name for ourselves, what do we like and what do we not like. And when you drill down to much more specifics, you're able to think about, what colors do I really enjoy wearing? What feel of fabric do I like? That wool sweater, it's really scratchy. Do I need to really keep that like scratchy sweater? Do I need to keep that dress for the someday when I might be asked to a certain event and wear it? Are those high heels that I really like? Or are they all scuffed up? When you start to get really granular about some of those questions with something like clothing, you can then step back and begin to ask similar questions to even more complex sort of categories. And the example that I give in the book with decluttering in kids is like, you know, oftentimes when you approach decluttering with kids and you go straight for the toys that you are sick and tired of seeing out, and you go to your kid and you're like, hey, I see that you have 10 dinosaurs. I really need you to choose one to keep. Like, you get to choose one. What does the kid do? They immediately start crying. They're like, why do I have to do this? Why do I have to get rid of this? And then the parent is like, okay, I'm not approaching that again with the kid. Like, my kid, I'm just going to have to live with this mess until they finally grow out of it. But that would be like someone coming up to us and saying, hey, all of those like high school letters that you've been holding on to, like, you get to keep one of them. Or like, all those photos from childhood, like all those photos with your grandma, like, you get to keep one of them and the rest go. And oftentimes, personally, as adults, we start with items that hold great sentimental value. And likewise, we do that with kids because the dinosaur collection is so sentimental for those kids. And I do feel like it's really important when you're approaching these questions of what is just enough, or what's really important to me, or what do I want to keep versus what do I want to move out. You really have to start with low stakes items, and then you can begin to gradually, move to higher level sort of questions and philosophy on life. And that's what I learned through my experience. Like, yes, I recount in the book that there was this like implosion that sort of happened in our apartment, this metaphorical and sort of literal implosion. But through that implosion, as we were sorting through photos and books and baby onesies, I then did start to ask myself deeper questions about, what do I value? What is important? What is just enough? And then transfer those questions to other things that really do matter, like career and how we want to allocate our time, and how are my wife and I going to balance childcare responsibilities. What does my wife want from her career? What do I want from mine? How are we going to make this balance work? How am I going to go back to school and say, hey, by the way, can I negotiate like leaving early 2 days a week because I need to run home so that I can literally have my wife hand off my daughters to me so that she can go and do her like occupational therapy sessions in the afternoon. All of those are tidying related questions. But when you start with something low stakes, like your clothing, you can begin to gradually apply it to other areas of life that may have a bit more impact than, do you want 5 blue shirts or do you want 10 blue shirts?
Yeah, I love that you have these bigger questions that are more broad. What do I like? What do I enjoy? What is important to me? Right? Those big
Yeah.
questions down into the granular questions. What specifically do I like about this item? What specifically feels good when I put this shirt on my body or whatever? And I think all of that advice is so sound, and I appreciate that because, like you said, we do want to get rid of the quote, the maybe literal or metaphorical dinosaur collection. Because we see it all the time, when in reality, like, it would make more sense to take our kids to their sock drawer and be like, which socks do you
Yes.
not like to wear?
Yes.
That's a safer space for them to start building their own decluttering muscle. Tell me honestly, do you think you get enough sleep? You probably don't. And you're probably super restless. Now, I don't have an Apple Watch or one of those things that tell me how well I'm sleeping because I'm one of those people that feels trapped really easily. I shared this story once on my Instagram, but Aaron got me an Apple Watch last Christmas and I was not having it. I had to like very gently be like, no, thank you. I don't need something telling me to stand up. Like, that makes me want to sit down more. I am a rebel when it comes to that. But you know how I do know if I'm getting enough sleep or if I'm sleeping well? It depends on what sheets I'm sleeping in. Like, truly, because I will wake up hot and sweaty if I'm in some cheapo sheets. But if I'm in my Cozy Earth bamboo sheets, I know that I've gotten a good night's sleep because I didn't wake up in the middle of the night trying to adjust my body so I can cool down or warm up or whatever my body has changed its mind that it needed. The breathable sheets allow me to sleep completely through the night and I feel like a new woman. This bamboo sheet set is truly the ultimate gift this holiday season. I know that if you're listening to this, you're running a little behind on gifts and you need to figure out what to get. Get these Cozy Earth sheets for the person that you love. You can also get their women's stretch knit long sleeve bamboo pajama set, which literally not a single woman on this planet would complain about if she opened under the tree. They are so comfortable and so stylish and cute. She's going to feel like the star of a cute Hallmark Christmas movie whenever she curls up in these cute pajamas. Or just do yourself a favor and get them for yourself. How do you do that? You go to cozyearth.com/pairing. Remember, there's no I in pair, PARING, and use my exclusive 40% off code pairing to give the gift of luxury this holiday season. If you get a post-purchase survey, say that you heard about Cozy Earth from this podcast. Get that good night's sleep in breathable sheets that keep you comfortable all night long, and wrap the ones you love in luxury with Cozy Earth at cozyearth.com/pairing with the exclusive 40% off code pairing. And speaking of kind of a practical level here, one of the ways you suggest decluttering with intention versus decluttering after an implosion, and you've done both. You've done,
yes.
and you talk about the difference between
Yes.
decluttering with intention versus like it's a reaction to an implosion. But one of those intentional decluttering strategies you use is a decluttering calendar, which I thought was so great. I've actually never done anything like this before. Can you paint a picture of what like a decluttering calendar might look like for people?
Yeah. So, going back to rethinking for a minute, this idea that decluttering is a one and done process is a huge fallacy. And if you buy into that, you're just going to set yourself up for some mental and emotional failure later. The idea is that new things are constantly coming into our space and we constantly have to assess, where's it going to go? Is this replacing some other item? Is this meeting a need, that some sort of unmet need, whatever. Or if you're living with little children, like, they're always growing. So they're always going to have, what is their current clothing size, plus what did they just grow out of, plus what are they about to grow into. And so the idea is, when you're rethinking decluttering and when you think about it from this cyclical sort of process, I like to think of the yearly calendar. And when we've built out the yearly calendar, the idea is that you sort of want to treat your home and decluttering sort of like how you would run a business, because the stores are really great at putting on sale or putting in the store the items that you need just before you need them. So like now, all of the holiday decor, when does it come out? Like end of September, early October, because that's when people are starting to think about holiday decor. Nobody wants holiday decor in January. Just like if you've decided to declutter all of your holiday decor in January, no one is going to take it off of your hands. Just like if you decide that late March is the perfect time to go through your kids' winter coats, no other family wants to take your kids' winter coats off their hands because they're also transitioning into spring. But you know when people want your kids' outgrown winter coats? They want them beginning of October, first part of November. It's now. So when you start to outline this cyclical nature to decluttering, it helps to make it less overwhelming. Like if you know, okay, in the month of January, I'm going through X, Y, and Z, and I'm also going to go through this again next January, you're then able to set yourself up more for success, because as we know, it's one thing to go through the items and it is another thing to move them onto somebody else who can use them. It's not just about throwing stuff away or just dropping it off to donation centers, because when you're dropping off donation, those winter coats in the middle of July, that donation center may not have space on their racks to put it away. And so I do feel like thinking like a consumer, it's a really funny way to think about decluttering, but like you've got to think about what are the things that people want at the time when you're decluttering, because you're much more likely to get it into the hands of people who can actually use and need them. And when you're decluttering, again, the coats in October, that is your time to be able to hopefully receive a coat from someone else, or use your buy nothing group, use your pre-loved groups, like online, sort of put out that feeler of like in your friend group, hey, does anybody have a 4T coat that their kid is no longer using? Chances are in your like community, even at school, somebody's going to have a 4T coat that they could give you. So I do feel like that has been such an emotionally and mentally sort of freeing process, is like have the decluttering calendar set when you're going through which items when, and then just start that like yearly rotation.
It's so smart. It is so smart to look at it month by month. January, I'm going to declutter this category, blah, 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 blah. And, I've said something before that, the interesting part about having a podcast and also just speaking publicly like you do is sometimes you say things and then you're like, like, I don't know if I fully agree with myself,
Yeah.
And so I've said before that, like, I do think that we can get overwhelmed thinking that decluttering is forever. And really that the decluttering process is you're getting rid of all the excess that you've had. And then the maintenance stage is that is the reassessment of everything. Mm-hmm. But I mean, realistically, that is still a form of decluttering. You know what I mean? I just think that it is not as overwhelming when you do it cyclically, when you have a calendar, when you are far more conscious about what you're bringing in. So you're not, re-upping all of the stuff in your house that you spent, however long decluttering in the first place, right?
Yeah.
So there is power in viewing it as more of a lifestyle and a maintenance. But I think that's why the decluttering calendar works so well, is because it's a cyclical piece of maintenance in your home. It's not this overwhelming, I've got to do the initial big declutter all the time like that. No, that doesn't make sense. If you've decluttered your home once and you are very conscious about what you're bringing back in because you've gotten to that why, and you have a different relationship with items, then these cyclical decluttering moments are not as overwhelming as that first time when you're getting everything out.
And it's always so much easier. You develop these like muscles and chops, and it sort of becomes somewhat intuitive. And with the calendar, we've talked to our family about it. Like, I'm not giving grandparents a bad rap, but many people express to me, like when they DM me, they're like, people keep bringing stuff over to my house. And what do I do? And it's like, well, first of all, you're in charge of what comes into your house and you deciding what you want to keep and what you want to move out. But also, like, the great toy edit is one of those things that always happens in our decluttering calendar. We always do it right before our daughter's birthdays because we have, similar to you, they're not on the same day, but with the three girls, it's a 6 week stretch of time that we have
Wow.
all three girls' birthdays, because as a teacher, you can't always time things, but we just happen to have like late spring pregnancies and deliveries, which always helped my like teacher schedule, whatever. Um, but, we have the Great Toy Edit Part 1, which is around the girls' birthdays. We have the Great Toy Edit Part 2 in late October, early November. And we have told our families that the Great Toy Edit happens, which also then helps to inform what it is that they purchase for the girls, because we're able to concretely say, you know what, the girls could really use some new like construction paper. I know that that sounds like a really strange sort of gift. You might want to get something else, but like they really just want a new pack of construction paper. Or like all of the markers have sort of like dried out. Or, our youngest has really moved out of that like toddler stage. We're moving out a lot of the toddler toys, but what she's ready for next is like this type of block set or this type of puzzle. And so the more specific we are and can guide others in gift giving, it's then this process of like even more joy and appreciation and gratitude when these new things come in. And so we've talked to our families about, this is when the toy edit happens. This is what we sort of moved out because they're moving into this new developmental stage. And I feel like that has stopped this like, oh, grandma and grandpa are coming over, like they're bringing over this like armload full of stuff in May when they're coming to visit. And it's like, no, our girls don't need that. Just come and spend time with them or take them to the zoo, thanks to the zoo membership that you got them for Christmas. So it's interesting how the decluttering calendar can sort of trickle down to all these conversations that you have with all of the different stakeholders in terms of the stuff that comes in.
Right. Because sometimes it is not just us that affects our space. It's not just the people who live there, or, I've said this before, but my husband is far more of a stuff guy than I am. We don't have the same threshold or views on clutter, and that's okay. My house does not look like it would if I was the only person who lived here, or if, whatever it might be. And that is, it's so important to keep that in mind, but to also, it proves to the grandparents that like they get more excited when they see the kids playing with the things that they got them, right?
Yeah.
Versus just the stuff they got in a corner in a pile or it's been donated. And so that motivates them in the future to kind of wait and hear what are they looking for. My parents now email me usually in November if they haven't heard from me yet. Like, what are your kids into? Well, what's something that they need? Because they know that then the kids will use them, and I will send lots of pictures of the kids using the markers or the bead set or whatever it might be. It could be something more extravagant like a Power Wheel. Like my kids are prime Power Wheel age.
Yeah.
We live in a neighborhood that is very Power Wheel friendly. We've got these big wide sidewalks, and my kids, they take those little mini four-wheelers. I mean, you would think that they are on the back hills of some farm somewhere. They are just cruising, and it is so fun, but anywho, but that won't last forever. If we go back to Alaska, those Power Wheels are not coming with us, I promise you. So we used to live in Alaska. That's a side note. So
yeah.
Okay, so we have to talk about Surthrival because it's one of my favorite things. There are so many. I sent you this list of questions, Tyler, and I knew in my little heart that there were too many. Okay, but how could I stop myself as I was like going through all my highlights in your book? I'm like, I want to ask about this. Everyone, you guys just got to read the book. There's so much good stuff in it. But one of the things you're known for is this idea of Surthrival. So can you tell us what Surthrival is and why it's so important when it comes to keeping a tidy life?
Yeah, so survival is this play on one part survival and then the other part thriving. And it's those periods of time where we feel like our mental and emotional capacity is sort of outweighing what we might be able to handle. And so a classic example is like early parenthood. Like when you have that newborn at home, everyone says, oh, what a beautiful time this is. This is the best years of your life. This is going to be so wonderful. Just smell that little baby. And you're like, okay, on the one hand, you understand that. You're like, yes, I love this little human more than I ever thought imaginable. But then you're also like, oh my gosh, it's 11:30. I thought we were going to be able to go to sleep. The baby just woke up. Who's going to like feed the baby and try to get the baby back? Because probably one of us has to go to work in the morning and I just want to sleep. Like that's an example of survival where you're conscious of the beauty of the season of life where you're also just trying to survive. Another is like the back to school season, which honestly is more of a New Year's start sometimes than January 1st, because it's this like 6 to 8 week season of time. Because what I try to tell people is back to school isn't a day, it really is this whole season where you're shifting from summertime. Everybody's like back in school, work is happening, you have all these new teachers, all these new expectations, you have homework coming home, you have to do the dinner, bath, bed shuffle to try to get everybody back on a new schedule. You're feeling like the freedoms of summer are gone. And like that is a survival time. And so I feel like when you're able to consciously name that I'm in this survival season, and some people would call it an era, because some people are like, have I really left my survival season? Like, I think that I've been in the survival mode for like years now. Like, it can feel that way sometimes, but yet there are little strategies that we can use in order to help us navigate that particularly tricky season. And I feel like where this came from was, I used to have a serious case of the Sunday blues, where every Sunday, like clockwork, I felt the pressure of, oh my gosh, Monday's coming. And then the Sunday blues gradually started to become Saturday blues, where I was anticipating Sunday coming and the feelings that I was going to have about returning to work on Monday. And then it started to hit Friday, like Friday afternoon or evening at like 8 o'clock. I was starting the dread march of, oh my gosh, like I only have 2 days and then it's going to be a full week again. And so I had to retrain myself on, and like one strategy in the survival chapter is this idea of joy plotting. And like, can you just name for yourself anticipatory moments of joy throughout your week? And I remember years ago, I was going to become a marathon runner. And I remember reading, like, what do people do in order to train for a marathon when you hit that fatigue? And I remember reading about this runner who said that they would just have their mind jump from like one joy to the next, to the next. So they would say, like, as they're running, they're like, oh, look at that beautiful tree. And then their mind would go to like, you know what? I really love my running shoes. And then they're like, oh, like I just ran past my like favorite restaurant. I love that place. And if you can train your brain to start jumping from one joy to the next, you can then sort of get through some of those lulls that you experience. So you have to consciously sort of think about, what can you do in order to thrive this season? Sometimes it's like, and I know this relates to chapter 5, which is stop doing all the work. Sometimes it's naming, like, we're going to order out 1 day a week. Tuesdays are always my slump day. So like, let's just order out on Tuesdays for this season. Or saying, you know what? I'm going to spend like money on a coffee only on Fridays, because that's my little like, okay, the weekend's coming. Like, you get that freshly brewed cup and it just feels great. It could be saying to a spouse, like, on Sunday afternoon, I really just need like 30 minutes to go and take a walk by myself, because I feel like when I have that 30 minutes, I'm able to sort of like reset myself for the coming week. Like, you have to name the season that you're in. You have to name, why does it feel like I'm struggling to survive right now? But then turn and flip the coin and say, what could it look like to thrive in this moment? What are those little things that I could do? And so I feel like I've heard from many people that that's one of their favorite chapters in the book, because it sort of helps with this, like, tidy up your mind, because we've all been in those seasons of life. We may all be in that era, for the next foreseeable future, or we can anticipate that one's about to come. But I do feel like there are tangible things that we can do to tidy things up, even when we feel like we're just struggling to survive.
It's such a gentle approach to positivity. To me, survival is the opposite of toxic positivity. I would say
Yes.
that.
Yes.
Like, toxic positivity says you have to be happy no matter what your circumstances are. And survival is saying, hey, do what you need to do to make your life a little easier. Be gentle on yourself. I love you talk about scruffy hospitality. I just love that term. Be gentle on yourself. Order the pizza, have scruffy hospitality, all of that. And it is within your bandwidth or your ability to control some mindsets that can help you thrive more. You don't have to dwell in the dark place as though you just have to muscle through, survive it the best you can, but it's just miserable. That doesn't have to be the case either. You can be gentle with yourself with these strategies to make your life easier, and you can thrive with more positive mindsets. And so I really appreciate that balanced approach. It's so good. I'm going to say sayonara to all of these other questions I have. And I'm just going to tell the listeners, you just have to buy this book. I'm telling you, I'm obsessed with it. It's so good. I'm going to actually have it on my Instagram. I do nonfiction and fiction book reviews. And so I'll make sure I put it in there. So anyone listening, you can go to my Instagram. Of course, you can go to Tyler's as well, Tidy Dad. And you can read my book review of it in my nonfiction highlight. But there's just so much more we could talk about. However, we're going to transition into the two questions that I ask everyone at the end of every podcast. And the first one, Tyler, is what is something that you are currently paring down?
So something I'm currently paring down, I do feel like I'm still continuing with my like capsule wardrobe sort of challenge. Like I successfully navigated the 30 items for 30 days. But then over the weekend, I pulled out all of the clothing that was in the bin underneath the bed because I knew for myself that I couldn't see all of those other items, or else I felt like I would relapse as the month sort of unfolded. But I'm currently paring down my like work wardrobe in service of like my play clothes or like my weekend clothes. And I know that's funny to sort of name, but like I learned from myself that like when I was a kid, we always had the clothes that we wore to school, and then we had the like clothes that we had to change into after school that my parents called the play clothes. And I feel like as an adult, I needed those too. So I'm like trying to figure out all of these like dress clothes and these shirts that are like sort of like aren't the most comfortable. We talked about the sweater that's just a little bit scratchy. And I'm really trying to think about how can I continue to pare down this wardrobe? I mean, my closet is 7 feet tall by 14 inches wide. It's very tiny. So it'd be funny
It's
to show
awesome.
your husband my closet, and maybe it would inspire him, or he would be like, no way. But, that is something that I'm still trying to work through because I just need less decision fatigue in my life. Like, I just need it to be simple. This is something that I can control. And so I'm excited to like dive deeper into that.
Love that. Second question. What is something that you are looking forward to?
Something I'm looking forward to. One thing is we have some exciting like spring travels coming up. We're going to Madrid. We're going to Spain because it is cheaper to fly from New York City to Madrid than it is to fly from New York City to Orlando, Florida, or
Stop
to
it.
St. Louis, Missouri, or to Houston, Texas. So we're doing that in February. And then I'm planning this trip to Colombia for all of us that again, for spring break, that again, is cheaper to go to South America than it is again to Orlando, Florida, or to Miami. Not to knock those places, but like what I'm looking forward to, and it's, inspiring listeners too, that it's like, you can think outside the box. You can think a bit more flexibly. It's not that we live this lavish lifestyle. We've sort of shifted our mindset. So those are things I'm looking forward to.
That's the coolest. Alrighty. Well, Tyler, where can everyone follow you? I mean, we've talked about it already, but
Yeah.
please let us know where your website is, what your handles are, and where
Yeah.
everyone can buy your book, Tidy Up Your Life.
Yeah. So on Instagram, I'm Tidy Dad. My website is thetidydad.com. You can buy the book wherever books are sold. There's also a great audiobook that was so fun to record. And so I have heard from several people they're excited to like listen while they're going through the different routines of the day, or even for the second half of the book, like listen to, the bedroom chapter while you're tidying things up or going through your closet. Like I do feel like it's one of those where you can come back to it again and again, but there's something nice about hearing the book in the author's voice. A joke I did
Yes.
ask, they were like, do you want to record the audio? And I said, well, that depends. Like, are Morgan Freeman or Viola Davis available? Because I do think and they were like, no, I don't think so. And so I was like, okay, I'll read it. But if Morgan Freeman or Viola Davis become available, like I'm totally fine with them reading the book. So anyway.
I want a Tyler Moore audio version, and I definitely also want a Morgan Freeman version. Like, I think that they both need to exist. That would be ideal. Awesome. Well, I'll make sure that all of that information is in the show notes for everyone. Tyler, thank you so much for being here. You are just a delight.
Thanks for having me.
You just listened to an episode of Paring Down with me, Shannon Leyko. If you enjoyed the show, it would mean the world if you can leave a review wherever you listen and share this episode with a friend. Those reviews really are what keeps a podcast on its feet for the long haul, and I will read every single one with a huge smile on my face. So thank you ahead of time. If you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to hit subscribe. Also, be sure to follow along on Instagram at paring_down, where I offer lots of tips and inspiration for paring down, along with what's new here on the podcast. Till next time.